The sun burned low across the small border town, bleeding the sky into copper and scarlet. Dust lifted off the street in slow, choking spirals, stirred by the restless hooves of tethered horses. Folks crowded the square like vultures, eyes hungry, their shadows stretched long against the warped wooden buildings. At the center stood a makeshift platform, a wagon bed stripped bare and raised high, the boards creaking under the weight of 3 trembling figures. The sisters. The eldest clutched her siblings' hands as if she could hold them together against the pull of the world. Her face was pale but proud, jaw tight, eyes rimmed red yet refusing to weep in front of the crowd. Beside her, the middle sister trembled but glared at the men gathered, defiance sparking in the dark wells of her eyes. The youngest, barely more than a girl, kept her gaze lowered, hair curtaining her flushed cheeks, silent tears tracing down. Behind them stood 2 men, their so-called guardians. In-laws by name, wolves in truth. One chewed a plug of tobacco, spitting brown venom into the dust, his face pockmarked and cruel. The other leaned on a rifle, eyes cold and calculating, lips twisted in a thin smirk. They had dragged the sisters out after their father's death, stripping them of property, rights, and dignity. Tonight they meant to finish the work, auctioning them off like cattle to the highest bidder. The crowd muttered, whispered, measured. Men with calloused hands and dirty coins tucked into their vests. Some hungry for labor, some for cruelty, others for things better left unspoken. The pockmarked one raised his voice. "Gentlemen, fine stock here. 3 for the taking. Strong hands for house or field. Who'll start the bidding?" A silence stretched, broken only by the jingle of spurs and the creak of wagon wheels. Then a voice, low, oily, eager. $20 for the youngest. The youngest sister flinched, clutching her sister's skirt. The eldest raised her chin, voice sharp as glass. "We ain't for sale." The crowd laughed, jeers and whistles. Her defiance only made the bidding fiercer. 25. 30 for the pair. 40 for the lot. The numbers climbed, coins flashing in the sun, the sisters shrinking back with every call. And then silence again. Heavy. Weighted. A horse's hoofbeats echoed down the street. Slow, steady, unhurried. Heads turned, whispers stirring as the figure appeared at the far end of the square. A tall man astride a black stallion, coat dusted from the trail, wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. The kind of man folks noticed because he didn't ask to be noticed. The rancher. Elias Cade. His name was known, whispered. Owner of more land than anyone could see from a hilltop, wealth in cattle and silver veins hidden in his ridges. But he was a man who lived alone, his spread vast and empty save for himself. They called him the lonely rancher, the one who never married, never drank in town, never wasted a word he didn't mean. He rode closer, reined in the stallion at the edge of the square. For a moment, silence stretched again. His eyes, dark and steady, scanned the platform, the girls, the in-laws behind them. Then he spoke, voice low, gravel rolled in whiskey, cutting through the dust like a blade. "I'll take all 3. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The pockmarked in-law sneered. "Ain't no bulk deal here, Cade. You bid like the rest." Elias dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a thud that made the horse snort. He walked forward, each step deliberate, the kind of movement born of a man who knew there was nothing in the world that could stop him once he set himself in motion. He stopped at the edge of the platform, pulled a pouch from his coat heavy with coin, let it drop into the dust. The sound rang louder than any gunshot. "That should cover it," he said. The crowd leaned in, eyes wide, mouths dry. The in-laws glanced at each other, greed warring with pride. Coins spilled from the pouch, gleaming in the sunset, more money than they dreamed of squeezing from this auction. Still, the rifle holder spat, voice sharp. "You think you can walk in here and buy what's ours?" Elias's gaze lifted, slow, steady. He didn't reach for his gun. Didn't raise his voice. Just looked at the man until the silence cracked and sweat beaded under the outlaw's hat. "They ain't yours," Elias said. "Not anymore." The eldest sister's breath caught. The youngest looked up through tear-streaked lashes. The middle one's eyes widened, searching his face for mockery, finding none. The square held its breath. The in-laws hesitated, greed glittering in their eyes, but behind it a flicker of unease. Because when Elias Cade spoke, it wasn't just words. It was weight. It was warning. At last, the pockmarked one bent, scooped the pouch, fingers trembling just enough to betray him. He spat into the dust, voice bitter. Fine. Take him. Not worth a bullet anyway. The crowd groaned, disappointed. Some cursed under their breath. But none stepped forward. Elias turned to the sisters. Come. They hesitated, looking at each other, fear and disbelief mingling. But something in his tone left no room for question. The eldest helped the youngest down, then the middle followed, their skirts brushing against the wagon's rough boards. They stood close, uncertain, trembling in the heat and the weight of the stairs. Elias mounted again, pulling the youngest up behind him, then the middle, then the eldest, settling them as best as he could on the black stallion's broad back. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at the in-laws clutching their ill-gotten silver. He only looked at the road stretching out of town, where the sun bled red into the horizon. And without another word, the rich, lonely rancher rode out, 3 sisters clinging to him, the dust rising like smoke behind them. The legend had begun.
The black stallion carried them hard through the falling dusk, hooves drumming against packed earth, dust spiraling like smoke behind. The 3 sisters clung to Elias Cade in silence, their skirts tangled, their hearts pounding too loud in their ears to speak. None of them knew this man, this stranger who had cut through the auction like a knife. Yet here they were, bound to him now by a choice not their own. The town's lights faded into distance. Only the dry land remained, endless scrub, sagebrush trembling in the wind, the horizon etched in fire by the setting sun. Coyotes yipped far off, the high-pitched cries scattering through the rocks. The youngest sister pressed her face into Elias's back, hiding her tears. The middle sister gripped the leather tight, jaw clenched, anger simmering just below fear. The eldest kept her eyes open, scanning the darkness, her mind already working through questions she dared not voice. At last, the trail bent, and the ranch appeared. It rose from the land like a fortress, timbers weathered but strong, fences stretching wide into the blackening plains. Barns stood silent, their shadows deep. The house itself loomed larger than the sisters expected, its porch sagging but broad, lantern light faint in a single window. Beyond, the land rolled on forever, cattle grazing in the dim, ghost-like against the rising moon. Elias reined in the horse, swung down, and helped the sisters dismount. His hands were steady, impersonal, but careful. He said nothing, only led them up the porch steps, boots thudding heavy against the planks. Inside, the house breathed stillness. Dust motes drifted in lamplight. A fire smoldered low in the hearth, though no one had stoked it recently. The air smelled of leather, with smoke, and the faint metallic tang of oil. "This is your home now," Elias said finally, voice low. The sisters turned, startled. "Home?" the middle one asked, her tone edged, distrust raw in her eyes. "You mean to keep us here?" Like they meant to. Elias's gaze shifted to her, slow, measured. "No. You'll eat. You'll rest. What comes after is yours to decide." The eldest laid a hand on her sister's arm, a silent warning. Then she spoke, voice cautious. "Why? Why do this for us?" He didn't answer. Not with words. He crossed to the hearth, crouched, and added a log, coaxing the fire to life. The flames flared, shadows bending across his weathered face, revealing lines carved by years of sun and silence. "Sit," he said. They obeyed, skirts rustling as they lowered themselves onto a worn settee near the fire. The youngest curled close to her sisters, her eyes darting nervously over every shadow in the room. From the kitchen, Elias returned with bread, dried meat, and a jug of water. He set them down without ceremony. "Eat." The girls glanced at each other, then at him. Hunger won out over pride. They tore at the bread, sipped the water, their hands trembling. Only once their stomachs eased did the eldest speak again. "My name's Clara," she said softly. "This is Ruth. And Lila." She nodded at each sister in turn. Elias nodded once. "Cade." "Mr. Cade," Clara began, "you've done more than we can repay. But don't." His voice cut her words clean. "Don't talk of debt. You owe me nothing." Silence hung heavy after that. The fire popped. Wind rattled the shutters. It was Ruth, the middle sister, who broke it, bitterness still in her tone. They'll come after us. You know that. Those bastards won't give up so easy. Elias leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the flames. His jaw tightened, but he did not look at her. Let them, he said simply. The words carried no boast, no bravado. Only fact. Clara shivered, though the fire burned warm. They ate in uneasy quiet, each girl lost in thought. When the plates were empty, Elias rose again. Rooms upstairs. Beds clean enough. Rest. Tomorrow you'll see the land. The sisters stood, hesitant. Lila clung to Clara's hand, eyes wide as they climbed the stairs. Ruth lagged behind, her gaze lingering on Elias, suspicion hard as stone. He did not return it. Upstairs, they found 3 rooms prepared, simple but with linens folded, quilts laid. Dust still clung in corners, but the beds were soft, the pillows thick. Clara tucked Lila into one, smoothing her hair, whispering soft words. Ruth leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I don't trust him, she said. Clara sighed. I don't trust anyone anymore. But he bought us freedom. That has to mean something. Or it means he's got his own plans, Ruth muttered. Lila's eyes fluttered shut. Her breathing slowed. The night pressed in. Downstairs, Elias Cade sat alone by the fire, revolver on the table beside him, a half-empty glass untouched at his elbow. His eyes fixed on the flames, but he wasn't watching the fire. He was listening to the land, to the silence, to the weight of ghosts that had long made this house empty. For the first time in years, there were voices upstairs. The sound of feet on the floorboards, the rustle of skirts, the quiet sighs of sleep. The ranch of silence was no longer silent. Elias took up the revolver, checked the chambers, then set it down again. Outside, the wind shifted. A coyote howled. Somewhere far in the night, hoofbeats echoed faint, deliberate. They would come, and when they did, Elias Cade would be ready.
The moon rode high, pale and cold, silvering the wide spread of Cade's ranch. The land stretched in every direction, rolling hills and dark fence lines, the cattle little more than shifting shadows beneath the night sky. Inside the ranch house, the sisters slept uneasily, Ruth with one hand on a kitchen knife she'd smuggled upstairs, Clara lying awake with worry heavy in her chest, and little Lila whimpering in dreams too dark for her young heart. Downstairs, Elias Cade did not sleep at all. He sat by the dying fire, revolver laid across his lap, hat pulled low, listening. Years on the land had taught him the rhythm of silence. How the coyotes sang, how the cattle groaned, how the wind scraped across the boards. Tonight the silence was wrong. Too tight. Too waiting. Hoofbeats. Distant, faint, muffled against the dirt but growing closer. He lifted his head, eyes narrowing, the firelight glinting in the dark pools. He rose without hurry, holstering his weapon, and stepped out onto the porch. The night air bit cool, carrying the dry tang of dust. From the ridge beyond his corral, shadows moved, 3 riders, maybe 4. Their figures cut dark against the moonlight, rifles glinting faint. Hired men, not strangers to this kind of work. Elias rested one hand on the porch post, the other near his revolver. His voice, when it came, carried across the quiet land like gravel dragged in a low stream. You're trespassing. The riders pulled up, horses snorting, breath white in the moonlight. One leaned forward, voice mocking. We're just visiting, Cade. Looking for something you've got. Or rather, someone. Another chuckled, the sound sharp as a knife. 3 someones if rumors true. Elias's eyes stayed steady. Ain't nothing here for you. The first rider spat. You think you can buy women like cattle and keep 'em? They don't belong to you. Elias tilted his head, slow as a coyote scenting blood. They don't belong to anyone. Least of all the bastards who sent you. The riders shifted in their saddles. Fingers twitched on rifle stocks. The standoff stretched, silence thick enough to choke. Then one of them laughed. We could burn you out, Cade. Drive your cattle, torch your barn, and take what's ours from the ashes. Elias didn't move, didn't blink. His hand brushed the butt of his revolver, a gesture so subtle it seemed like breathing. Try. Something in his voice carried weight heavier than bullets. The riders hesitated, their bravado cracking. Inside the house, Clara had crept to the upstairs window. She saw them, dark shapes against moonlight, rifles catching glimmers, and Elias alone on the porch, tall, unflinching. Ruth stood behind her, knife in hand, jaw tight. "They're here for us," Ruth whispered. Clara swallowed. "If they try, he'll fight. And if he loses?" Clara had no answer. Outside, the riders muttered, consulting among themselves. Finally, one spat into the dirt. "This ain't done, Cade. You can't keep him. Sooner or later we'll take what we came for." Elias's hand lingered on the revolver. But he didn't draw. Not yet. He only stood silent, the firelight from inside brushing the edge of his face, enough for them to see the calm there, the kind of calm that comes before thunder. The riders turned at last, spurring their horses back toward the ridge. Dust rose in ghostly swirls behind them, fading into the night. Elias stood until the sound of hoofbeats was gone. Then he stepped back inside, closing the door with deliberate quiet. Clara and Ruth were halfway down the stairs when he saw them, their faces pale in the lamplight. "You heard," he said. Clara nodded. "They won't stop." "No," he agreed. "They won't." Ruth tightened her grip on the knife, voice sharp. "Then what do we do?" "Hide here until they come again." Elias met her glare without flinching. "You rest tonight. Tomorrow we prepare." "Prepare for what?" His jaw set, voice gravel low. "For war." The sisters exchanged glances, unease sparking between them. Lila patted down the stairs in her nightdress, rubbing her eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered. Clara pulled her close, stroking her hair. "Nothing, sweetheart. Nothing you need to fear." Elias's gaze lingered on the youngest, her small frame trembling against her sister's skirts. His eyes darkened, the weight of old memories pressing. He had seen innocence torn from homes before, seen greed turn kin into monsters. He had sworn once never to get involved again. Yet here he stood. He turned away, stoked the fire higher, and set the revolver on the mantel where the flames lit the barrel in dull orange. "Sleep," he said. "All of you. Tomorrow comes fast." Clara led her sisters upstairs, though none found much sleep. Ruth paced, muttering her suspicions, blade always near. Clara prayed silently, clutching Lila tight. And downstairs, Elias Cade sat alone until dawn, the fire burning low, the revolver heavy in his palm. Beyond the horizon, the in-laws were gathering more men. The first night ride was only a warning. The real storm was yet to come. The sun rose hard and white, burning the land without mercy. Heat shimmered off the fence posts, the dry air carrying the smell of dust and cattle. On Cade's ranch, the sisters moved like shadows through a place too wide, too empty for comfort. Clara gathered water from the pump, her hands raw from work she had not chosen but forced herself to endure. Ruth paced the yard, sharp-eyed, restless, never straying far from the knife she now carried at her hip. Lila clung to Clara, her small hands dirty, her eyes darting at every sound. Elias Cade had been up before dawn. He rode the fence lines, checked the cattle, and came back silent as ever, his broad-shouldered figure steady in the saddle, black stallion lathered with sweat. When he dismounted, the sisters watched him. Ruth with suspicion, Clara with cautious gratitude, and Lila with something like fragile awe. "Fence is good," he said simply, tying off the reins. "But they're out there." Clara's chest tightened. "How many?" "Enough," Elias said. Ruth's jaw hardened. "Then why wait? We should run." "Run where?" His eyes fixed on her, unflinching. "They'll follow. This land's wide but not wide enough to lose men who ride for coin. Better to meet 'em here." Ruth bristled, but Clara put a hand on her arm. "He's right." Lila's small voice wavered. "Will they hurt us?" Elias crouched, leveling his gaze with the girls, his voice a steady weight. "Not while I breathe." That night the storm came. The sisters were inside when the first shot cracked the silence. A bullet punched through the window, shattering glass across the floor. Lila screamed, Clara pulling her down, Ruth already crouched with her knife, heart racing. Elias was on the porch before the echo faded. His revolver cleared leather smooth as water. Another shot split the dark and he answered, one crack sharp, precise. A rider toppled from the ridge, body thudding into dust. The others charged. Hooves thundered across the yard, lantern light catching rifles and snarling faces. Elias didn't move from the porch. He stood tall, dark against the glow inside, revolver steady in his grip. Each shot he fired dropped a man. No wasted motion, no panic. Just cold precision. The sisters watched through the broken window. Clara's breath caught with every flash of gunfire, Ruth's eyes wide despite her bravado, Lila clutching her tightly, trembling. "God help us," Clara whispered. But it wasn't God out there, it was Cade. One rider broke through, spurring hard, pistol blazing. He aimed not for Elias but for the house. For the sisters. Elias's eyes narrowed. He stepped off the porch, walking straight into the gunfire. Dust kicked around his boots, bullets biting wood behind him. He raised his revolver once, fired, and the rider's screams split the night as he toppled headlong into the dirt. Blood soaked into the dust, black under the moon. The horse bolted, reins trailing like broken rope. Silence returned, broken only by groans of the dying and the distant scatter of fleeing hoofbeats. Smoke curled from Elias's revolver, his face unreadable in the glow of the lantern swinging wild on the porch. Clara eased the window open, heart hammering. "Are they gone?" "For now," Elias said. Ruth stormed out the door, knife in hand, anger twisting her features. She stopped short at the bodies sprawled in the yard, faces slack, blood-soaking shirts. For a moment her bravado cracked, the reality of violence pulling her breath thin. Elias holstered his revolver, bent, and dragged one of the dead men into the lantern light. He tore open the man's vest, pulling free a scrap of cloth marked with a crude brand. He tossed it at Ruth's feet. "Your in-law's mark," he said flatly. Ruth's fists clenched. Clara stepped outside, holding Lila close, her eyes wide at the blood-darkened dust. "They won't stop," Clara whispered. "No," Elias agreed, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "They'll send more. As many as it takes." Ruth's voice trembled with rage. "Then we kill every last one of them." Elias looked at her, long and steady. "Killing's easy. Living after ain't." His words hung heavy. The sisters fell silent, the weight of them pressing like the desert heat. He dragged the bodies to the far fence, left them for the coyotes, then returned to the porch. He sat, revolver across his knees, the sisters gathered behind him, watching the horizon as though it might split open. The night stretched long, the land holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, answered by another. The sisters had seen what kind of man sheltered them. Not a savior. Not a hero. Something older, harder. Blood had been spilled in the dust, and it was only the beginning. The next day dawned heavy and still, the kind of morning where the air itself seemed to wait for trouble. The ranch stretched wide under the pale sky, cattle grazing slow, unaware of the violence that had stained the dirt only hours before. Buzzards circled already, their dark wings cutting lazy arcs overhead. Clara worked at the wash line with her sleeves rolled, her hands moving through the rhythm of chores that steadied her heart. Ruth stalked the yard restless, eyes always sweeping the ridges, knife flashing in her grip as though she meant to carve her anger into the air itself. Little Lila clung close to the porch, never wandering far, fear etched into her small shoulders. Elias Cade moved among them like stone given flesh. He repaired the front gate, set new boards in the porch railing, then checked his rifle with the same quiet precision as he'd shown the night before. Not a word wasted, not a movement that didn't serve a purpose. But his eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, kept lifting to the horizon. By afternoon, smoke rose. Clara saw it first. A thin column twisting upward in the distance, too far for the house but close enough to belong to the land. Her breath caught. Elias. He was already at her side, his gaze locked on the rising smoke. Another plume joined the first. Then another. Soon the sky bore streaks of black, smudging the horizon like ink. "They're burning," Elias said. His voice was calm but his jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck taut. "What?" Ruth demanded. "The herds," Elias said flatly. "And the barns." Clara's hand went to her mouth. Ruth's eyes flared with rage. "They're trying to starve you out." "Not me." His gaze slid toward the sisters. "You." Silence fell heavy. Lila whimpered, hiding her face against Clara's skirts. Ruth cursed under her breath, pacing like a caged wolf. "We can't just sit here," Ruth snapped. "We have to fight back." Elias turned his head slowly, his gaze fixing her in place. You want to fight, girl? Then know this, you fight on their terms, you lose. You fight on mine, you live. And what are your terms? Ruth spat. Elias looked past her, out toward the smoke curling higher in the sky. His voice came low, steady, carved from the same stone as the land itself. Patience. Timing. When you strike, you make it count. You make it hurt so bad they don't come again. The sisters fell silent. The fire on the horizon roared unseen, cattle lowing in terror, the wind carrying faint screams of beasts caught in the blaze. The smell reached them, burnt hair, scorched earth, ash drifting on the breeze. That night the sky glowed red. The sisters stood on the porch watching the hills burn, their faces lit by fire that did not touch them but consumed all around. Clara wept quietly, Lila clutched her hand, and Ruth stood stiff, her eyes reflecting flame, hatred raw in her chest. Elias remained at the edge of the yard, his figure outlined against the hellish glow. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his eyes burned brighter than the fire. Clara stepped forward, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this, Elias? Elias, you could have let them take us and none of this would have touched you. For a long time he didn't answer. The fire crackled on the wind. Finally he spoke, voice a low rumble. Because once someone should have stood for mine. And didn't. Clara's breath caught. Ruth's brow furrowed, trying to pry meaning from his words. But Elias said no more. The fire burned into the night. Sparks drifted like falling stars. The land smelled of death and smoke. Inside, the sisters tried to rest, but every creak of the house, every snap of the fire outside made them flinch. Ruth sharpened her knife until sparks flew, Clara prayed until her lips cracked, and Lila curled tight, whimpering in dreams. Elias did not sleep. He sat on the porch with rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting. Near dawn, hoofbeats echoed again. Not raiders this time, but a single rider. One of Cade's ranch hands from a far pasture, face blackened with soot, coughing ash. They torched it all, the man gasped, sliding from the saddle. Barns, fences, cattle screaming in the flames. We tried to cut him loose, but his voice broke. Elias caught him by the shoulder, steadying him. How many? The man shook his head, tears cutting clean lines through the soot. Too many. Elias released him, his face unreadable. He turned back to the burning hills, the smoke rising thick as a storm cloud. The sisters watched from the doorway, their hearts pounding. Clara saw the weight in Elias's shoulders, the way his silence seemed to darken with every passing moment. Ruth saw only his stillness and mistook it for weakness. They'll bleed you dry, she hissed. Piece by piece until there's nothing left. Elias finally turned, his gaze fixing on her sharp as steel. Then it's time they bled. The firelight gleamed in his eyes, and for the first time the sisters understood. The man who had saved them was not merely a rancher. He was something the land itself had shaped, stone, dust, and fury waiting to be loosed. And the in-laws had just given him cause. The ranch awoke to silence after the burning. No cattle lowed in the pastures. No ranch hands whistled at dawn. The air itself seemed hollow, stripped bare by smoke that still drifted in from the charred hills. Clara opened the shutters to a world the fire had blackened. Ruth paced like a restless spirit, blade in hand, as though she could carve justice into the wind. Lila sat pale and withdrawn, tracing patterns in the ash dusting the porch rail. But Elias Cade was already saddled. The big bay stallion stamped, nostrils flaring, eager for the road. Elias strapped on his gun belt, the metal catching the pale morning light. 2 revolvers polished by use. A rifle slung across his back. A knife at his boot. He moved like a man born in iron, every motion deliberate, every strap and buckle cinched with precision. You're going after them, Ruth said, her voice half accusation, half awe. Elias swung into the saddle, the leather creaking beneath his weight. His eyes swept the horizon, unreadable, then came back to her sharp as a hawk's. You think they'll stop? After fire comes blood. Always has. Always will. If I wait, they come here. Clara stepped forward, her hands twisting in her skirts. Then let us come. We can help. We're not helpless. Elias shook his head. 3 girls against a pack of wolves? No. We're more than girls, Ruth snapped, stepping close. And we owe them a reckoning too. Elias leaned down slightly, his gaze boring into hers. Reckoning don't come from rage. It comes from aim. And you don't got it yet. Ruth's mouth tightened, but she said no more. Clara's voice softened. What if you don't come back? For the first time, Elias's expression shifted. Just a flicker. The shadow of memory, something broken, something buried deep. His voice came low. Then you'll know I tried. He pulled the reins, the stallion tossing its head ready to fly. Then he paused, turning to Lila, who hadn't spoken a word since dawn. Girl, he said. Her head lifted slowly, eyes wide, lips trembling. Lock the doors. Keep the lamps low. If you hear hooves, don't breathe till you know whose they are. She nodded, her face pale but steady. And then Elias Cade rode out. Dust rose behind him, curling in the wind. He rode hard, the stallion pounding the earth in a rhythm that matched the thunder in his chest. The sisters stood on the porch, small and fragile against the yawning land, watching him vanish toward the horizon like a figure carved from legend. By noon he reached the border of his land. Smoke still drifted from the scorched pastures. Carcasses of cattle lay bloated and blackened, vultures tearing silently at the remains. He rode through it like a shadow, his jaw set, his eyes hard as the steel at his side. Ahead the trail forked. One path led back toward the town, the seat of lies, whiskey and whispered deals where the in-laws strutted like kings. The other wound into the Badlands, rough and cruel, where men vanished and bones bleached white under the sun. He didn't hesitate. He took the town road. The ride stretched long and hot. The sun bled into the sky, staining it red. Dust clung to his coat, sweat traced down his neck, but his focus never wavered. He was a storm with rains, fury bound in silence. By evening he reached the edge of town. The place looked the same, rickety buildings, warped signs, windows reflecting the dying light, but it felt different. Waiting. He dismounted at the saloon, tied the reins loose and pushed through the batwing doors. The room froze. Cards stilled mid-hand. Whiskey glasses hovered half-raised. Men at the tables glanced up and then down again, as though afraid his gaze might cut them open. Behind the bar, a man cleared his throat nervously. Elias Cade. Didn't expect. Where are they? Elias's voice cut like a blade. Silence pressed heavy. A card slipped from a man's hand and fluttered to the floor. The barkeep swallowed. You mean the Whitfield boys? Elias said nothing, just stared. They been at the mill house, the barkeep stammered. Down by the river. Heard they was celebrating. Elias's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. Celebrating what? The barkeep hesitated, then whispered, burning you out. The saloon went dead quiet. The only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath Elias's boots as he turned. No one dared follow him out. The river lay dark and sluggish under the rising moon. The old mill house squatted on its bank, windows glowing with firelight, drunken laughter spilling into the night. Elias dismounted, tied the stallion to a post and checked his guns. Both loaded. Rifle ready. Knife sharp. His breath came slow, steady. His heartbeat a drumbeat of resolve. He moved toward the mill house like a shadow. Inside laughter rose louder. Voices slurred, mocking. To the sisters. Pretty little things, weren't they? Shane K got to play hero. But he'll break, same as his land. Another voice barked. He's just one man. Can't fight fire with fists. The room roared with laughter again. Elias Cade stepped onto the porch, revolver in hand, and the laughter died. The door swung open, spilling lamplight onto him. His shadow stretched long across the dirt. Every man inside froze, glasses half raised, grins dying on their lips. Elias's voice came low, steady, carrying the weight of fire and ash. You burned what was mine. Now it's your turn. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. The mill house air stank of whiskey, sweat, and lies. Inside, the Whitfield men froze at the sight of him. A lone figure framed in the doorway, shadow stretching long across the floorboards. Elias Cade stood steady, revolvers loose in his hands, eyes dark as midnight stone. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then the eldest Whitfield brother, Samuel, broad and red-faced from drink, laughed, though his voice cracked. Well, look here. The rich recluse himself. Thought the fire might smoke you out. Elias didn't answer. His gaze drifted from one face to the next, counting, measuring, weighing. 5 men, all of them armed. All of them thinking numbers gave them the upper hand. You think you can just walk in here? Samuel barked, though the words trembled. This is Whitfield country. This is Cade land, Elias said, his voice flat, calm, carrying the weight of something older than law. And you set fire to it. The second brother, lanky Tom Whitfield, spat tobacco juice onto the floorboards. You think one man can scare us? You're alone, Cade. Elias's gaze flicked once toward the far corner where an oil lantern hung crooked, flame guttering. Then back to them. No, he said. You're alone. The room cracked in half with motion. Tom reached for his pistol. Elias moved first. One shot split the silence, sending the lanky man staggering back, blood blossoming across his shirt. The lantern swayed on its hook, spilling sparks into the dry wood. Shouts erupted. Chairs toppled. Samuel drew, roaring, but Elias dropped behind a table, 2 shots ringing quick and precise. Samuel's gun spun from his hand, his knuckles shattered. He screamed, clutching his ruined fingers. The others scrambled. One tried to flank him. Elias pivoted, rifle rising from his back in a single fluid arc. The shot punched through the man's chest, throwing him against the far wall. Smoke filled the air. The lantern had fallen, flame licking greedily across the planks. The Whitfields cursed, torn between the gunfire and the growing blaze. You're mad. Samuel bellowed through the smoke. You'll burn us all. Elias's voice cut through the chaos, steady as stone. You already did. He advanced, revolvers spitting thunder, each shot echoing like judgment handed down from the canyon walls themselves. The Whitfield men fell one by one, curses and cries swallowed by the roar of fire. When the last body hit the ground, silence returned, except for the crackle of flames. Elias holstered his guns and stood in the growing inferno, his shadow flickering against the walls. His eyes swept the carnage once, then turned toward the door. He didn't look back. By dawn, the mill house was ash. Smoke curled skyward in black ribbons. Townsfolk gathered at a distance, whispering in hushed tones, afraid to step closer, afraid to say aloud what they knew, that Elias Cade had brought the fire with him. The sisters waited on the ranch porch, faces drawn, eyes red from sleepless worry. Clara clutched Lila close while Ruth paced, knife in hand, every sound making her flinch. When hoofbeats finally thundered down the trail, their hearts seized. Elias rode out of the smoke, clothes scorched, face streaked with soot, eyes burning like embers. He dismounted slow, steady, tying the stallion with hands that trembled only once before stilling again. Clara rushed forward. Elias. She stopped. Words failed. He met her eyes, silent. Behind him, the horizon glowed faint with the last of the fire. Did you? Ruth asked, though she already knew. They won't trouble you again, Elias said simply. His voice was gravel dragged over steel. Lila buried her face against Clara, sobbing with a mixture of relief and fear. Ruth's eyes narrowed. And what of the law? They'll come looking. Elias's gaze shifted to her, hard and unflinching. Law don't ride this far. Out here the land keeps its own justice. Silence fell. Only the wind stirred, carrying the scent of ash and blood across the ranch yard. Clara reached out, her hand trembling as it touched his arm. You saved us. You didn't have to, but you did. For the first time Elias's mask cracked. A faint smile, tired, sad, tugged at his mouth. Didn't do it for thanks. Then why? She asked softly. His eyes darkened, gaze drifting to the horizon where the sun rose blood red. Because once I lost someone. And no one stood for her. I won't make that mistake again. The sisters exchanged glances, the weight of his words pressing deep. Elias straightened, shoulders broad against the rising sun. You'll stay here till you're ready to choose your own road. Ain't no auction, ain't no man decides your fate now. Only you. Clara swallowed hard, her heart trembling between gratitude and awe. Ruth gripped her knife tighter, rage tempered into something sharper, resolve. And little Lila peeked out from Clara's skirts, eyes wide with the dawning spark of hope. Elias turned back to his horse. His figure cut against the light, a man half shadow, half legend. Where are you going? Clara asked. He paused, one hand on the reins. His voice carried low, almost a whisper, but it reached them clear. Where I'm needed. Always another fire somewhere. With that he swung into the saddle. The stallion reared, hooves striking sparks from the stones, then thundered down the trail. Dust rose behind him, swallowing his figure, until only the echo of hoofbeats lingered. The sisters stood together, clutching one another as the sun climbed higher. The ranch still smoldered, the land scarred, but the air felt different now. Safer. For though he was gone, they knew his shadow still walked the canyon, a promise etched into the earth itself, that the lonely rancher had stood for them and in doing so had carved his legend deeper into Sundown's soil. The legend of Elias Cade. Ashes and Oaths.